Hello. Hello. Right. Great to see you all. I feel like I have met a number of you over the years, so it's really lovely to see some familiar faces. And thank you for the introduction. So yes, I am quite long in the tooth from an industry perspective. I promise not to talk about when I first started the industry, apart from this one thing I will say. So I started back in the mid-90s as a media buyer at a company called Cleanser, which is owned by Clemenger in New Zealand. And I remember we used to do national print campaigns, and the way that we had our confirms was via a fax. So literally stood at a fax all day waiting for the confirmations to come through. So needless to say, your industry has changed hugely, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today, our learnings around what your industry looks like in the modern world and how can we learn from the people that are closest to it. I left the industry in January 2023 and set up my own company, which is called Tomorrow. That's all centred around putting people at the heart of business growth and helping your talent to grow through this sort of turbulent and complex times. So I feel very privileged to be up here to talk about this topic. So thank you. All right, that is me. So leading in the modern workplace is what we're here to talk about. And you all know there's different ways to look at leadership. We can look at it from leading ourselves, but also look at it from leading our teams. So let's start with a grab your fork and raise it in the air if you currently manage a team. Awesome. I'm gonna go with a 96% estimate there. Which is even better, because that means all of the content's going to be relevant to you guys. So when we think of the modern workplace, and it's really interesting to look at where we've come from, because what we do at work, not just your industry, but in general, how we work and the role of leadership has completely evolved over time. So if we reflect back on the industrial era, so remember that's the time when people were actually moving off the farms and starting to work in factories. And when we're working in factories, we start to get hired as a set of hands to do stuff. And in that time, it's really about our skills were really just to follow orders and to work hard, right? It was a pretty simple world. And when we think of the sort of the organisational structure, it was pretty hierarchical. So from a leadership perspective, it was all about command and control. So think back to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory's dad. And his job was to sit all day and put toothpaste lids onto the tubes. So very easy instructions. There was a wrong way and a right way. You know, it was black and white. You knew when something went wrong. Fast forward into the economy that we all started working in, right? The knowledge economy. We're all pretty focused on this, but this is where suddenly where we do our work expands out of just factories and moves into office buildings. We start to get hired for our heads, so for the smarts, right? So the ability to communicate and optimise the way that we communicate and work with people. Also, have the analytical and critical thinking to solve what's starting to become really complex problems. Because we start to work in teams to solve that problem. It's not just about us as individuals. And here, leadership is performance focused, so output. Now we find ourselves moving into this new era where it's bringing together the sort of human intelligence with the machine intelligence. You literally can't open up a piece of news now at the moment and not hear about something around AI, yeah? So when we think of this new economy that I've called the humane, because it's about wrapping that technology or that AI with the human element. Because AI is very, very clever, but it can only do so much in a binary way without putting that humanity around it. So we as humans are really important as we move into this new economy. And when we think of the skills that we need, it's really all about curiosity to start to think about the future and what's coming next. Creativity, yeah, that's that innovation, passion, and collaboration. And when we think of how we do work, so it's no longer just in teams, it's teams of teams, really nimble little teams that are constantly evolving, forming and reforming to solve those complex problems based on what that needs are. We know we're doing work anywhere, right? We're already there. No longer are we stuck in the offices. And really interestingly, leadership is now about being relationally intelligent. So that's about understanding people as humans, applying that sort of empathy, making sure that we're connecting into them as people and making sure that their work works for them in the way that they want it to work. And while we're sort of, have gone through this, but the acceleration that we've seen is huge, right? So going from that simple economy back in the industrial area to this really complex, unknown world that we're moving into. And in the media industry, we're moving into this pace of tectonic change. We see these AI apps bubbling up, right? So, some of you are already affected. We know that, two of the big holding groups have announced at the beginning of the year investing half a billion dollars in AI. That's going to have some pretty significant impacts on what you guys do on a day-to-day basis, right? So we need to rethink about how we approach the modern world. And when we also think of just, who's doing the work, what's interesting is that for the first time we have the most generations in our workforce than ever before. And that's for a number of reasons. But interestingly, according to the World Economic Forum, as of 2025, there will be 27% of working Australians will be Gen Z. But what's even more interesting is if we apply that increase to your data for the media industry. Because at the end of 2023, you already had 30% Gen Zs working in your industry. If we apply that increase, you're going to be looking at 42% of your employees will be Gen Z. That's quite a while, right? So what does that mean? Well, essentially, what it means is that our future leaders are Gen Zs. They are the single most influential group that are helping to shape the modern workplace, particularly in the media industry. So what does that mean? Well, essentially it means that we need to really listen, learn and adapt to their changing needs. Make sure that the work that we create and the environments that we create work for them, but not just for them, for all of us, right? Because we want to be pretty happy too, yeah? So let's take a look at some interesting things that are influencing Gen Z. So the first one is, as you guys all know, they're entering the workforce during geopolitical and economic instability. So what that means is that they come with very real financial worries. They're driven to succeed, but succeed really, really fast. They want to get promoted, they want to get pay rises. They're the era of the side hustle. And that's not only from a passion perspective, but that's actually to supplement their income as well. So they're digital natives. So when we think about hybrid work, that's all that they've ever known. So working from home and working from the office, there is really no distinction. It's all one and the same. They're hyper-connected to what's going on in their world. They've been exposed to endless perspectives and opportunities. So with this comes this kind of natural curiosity around, going wide when they research things and then distilling all of that information to come to a solution. But also with this kind of hyper-connectivity comes almost this FOMO, this kind of sense of not wanting to miss out. Because, they can go on their snap mats and see where their mates are at an instant. They can also go onto TikTok and see, all of the company cultures, and even salaries are on TikToks. So they have access to all of this information. So what that means is churn's going to be a reality for them. They're going to find experiences elsewhere. Their world is hyper-customised. So, they've grown up being able to customise their own sneakers. So from a workplace perspective, what they want is they want to customise their own jobs. They want to customise their own career paths. They don't want something off the shelf. And they've only known a world in which you enable diversity and live true to your values. I find this one, the diversity thing is really interesting because what that means is it's not a selling point for companies anymore. It's an expectation. So make sure you've got those foundations right, or else they will find it a repellent. And the living into the values is super interesting as well, and something that I'm hearing more and more bubble up that we'll come to a little bit later. So today we're going to talk to 3 different questions. So the first one is, how do we create a fair value exchange where people feel their effort is recognised? So there's a lot of publicity about Gen Z and doing this thing called quietly quitting. Have you guys all heard about quietly quitting? Yeah. So not quitting, but just not going the extra mile. So how do we create an environment where they do actually feel like they get the value back to go the extra mile? The second one is, how do we continue to go through this tectonic change? So we know we're going through massive change as we move into this humane economy. We just don't have time to be complacent. So we need to make sure that we continue to grow. Yep, and we also continue to grow our people. And then the third one is the hot topic of flexibility. So how do we drive a culture of flexibility but still maintain accountability? Yep. Okay, so let's get on to the first one. So when we think this idea or this notion of a fair value exchange, there's a really interesting model around the expectancy theory of motivation. So what that means is really simply, when you give something to a company, so whether that be your effort, your energy, your motivation, your commitment, or your time, you expect there to be a balance with what you get back, right? Compensation, recognition, growth, or opportunity. And when we start to see that maybe that balance is off, that's where we see people pulling back from the give. So whether it is effort, whether it is energy. And that's where this notion of quietly quitting comes. But actually getting the balance right is where we start to see this feeling of connectedness into the company. And when we get that connection, that's where we start to drive engagement. That's where we start to drive better teamwork. That's where we start to drive productivity and retention, which is what we want, right? We want a big, happy team. So when we sort of reflect on Gen Zs, my research suggests that the top 3 things that they're looking for that actually really binds them into a company to build that connectivity, the number 1 is show them the path to promotion. So, and that's really, really interesting, right? That's sometimes a very simple conversation around not just sitting there and doing the doing, but having a conversation about what that might look like. But again, we'll get a little bit more into that on the next slide. Recognition. So I did some really lovely interviews with some really gorgeous Gen Zs, and they all came up with recognition. And again, like, who doesn't want recognition, right? And they specifically said it's not necessarily pay, it's just those little pats on the back, those little thank yous that connect them into understanding that what they're doing matters. So again, an opportunity for you to think about that. And the third one is an opportunity to meaningful work. So this is something that's going to be very personal to that individual, but at its very basic level, it can be just making sure that if they're doing some very, very foundational work, making sure they understand why and how that connects into the greater goal of the company. Understanding why if they stick an extra zero in the buying system, that what happens then, right? What's the impact? The client gets billed an extra zero, and then all hell breaks loose. So the reality, it's really, really personal, and that's something that I do go a little bit deeper into my workshops that I run. But a really good starting point for understanding what the right give back is to build this thing called a social contract. So a social contract is really the human elements of your relationship or contract with your team members that will mean that it gives them the reason to stay. So when really what it is it's balancing the 3 things between what the company needs, what the individual needs, and what you and your team needs. So if we start with the company, right, we all get a piece of paper, it's black and white. Hopefully we all read it with fine print, debatable. But it's actually taking that in and having conversations over and above it. So when we say that the office hours are 9 till 5:30, what does that mean when it also says, but occasionally from time to time you might need to work over and above that? Because is that going to be a kind of a absolutely can't do it? I'm hearing a lot of people saying Susie just won't work past 5. Is that because they didn't have that clarity on the upfront? When they're starting their job, if they're going to be doing really mundane things for the first year, have that clarity around them, but then make sure that they understand, what does year 2 look like? Why is it important that they sit down and do conference for the first year? Even before you've hired someone, again, be really, really clear on what's important to them from a values perspective. We know that they lean into values, and that's really, really important. So are there any clients that they're going to go, actually, I can't work on them. I don't eat red meat. I can't do that. I can't work on that R18 movie. I can't work on fried chicken. It's things that we're hearing bubbling up, right? So again, setting the boundaries and the parameters around that, is that realistic? Do you have enough bums on seats that if you're going to be pitching for a fried chicken account, they're going to go, sorry, I can't do that. So really putting transparency around that. The second one is this individual social contract. So this to me is the uber important one, and really starting to understand them as a person or an individual human, not just an employee. And again, what I like to say is really carve out time in your one-on-ones. So one-on-ones shouldn't be about you just talking about a bunch of tasks that need to get done. It's actually the time for them to shine and open up the conversation to ask these really big open-ended questions. So there are lots of questions there, and some of these take a while to sort of digest when you ask them, right? So what are you motivated by? For me, I need time to go, okay, just give me a couple of days to think about that, and I'll bring that into the conversation. And motivators are really individual as well, right? And the important thing is, when they do talk about their motivators, what do you do with that? It's the actions that follow up. And I'll give you an example, always an oversharer. A few years ago, I worked for a gorgeous woman, and she sort of did this, but not quite. And what I mean by that is, she'd pull me into her office in the one-on-one, and we'd have a conversation, and she'd actually get me to rate it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated do you feel? So the first time I was like, I reckon I'm about a 7, and she sort of circled it and then said great, and then walked out. Then we met 2 weeks later. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated do you feel? And I was like, I'm kind of the same as last time, because nothing's happened since then. And actually what happened then was, I just felt quite demotivated, because she was just going through a task-filling form, right? So it's actually having those conversations that is incredibly important. Are they buying, but actually super really excited by that data thing that's going on over there? Awesome. Let's talk about, you've got to get through your day job, but what can I do to help you to really learn and lean into that? And then we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. So the other, the side hustle thing, I think, is really, really important, and I'm sure you're all seeing it as well. There's a lot of interests and passions and things that are supplementing their day jobs. I'm hearing from crypto, scary stuff for me, but anyway, through to Pilates instructors, fashion, you name it, right? So have the conversation and be accepting of the fact that they've got this other life, right? But why do they find that really interesting? So why are they interested in doing that? And then bring it back to the group. What can we learn from your passion point, your side hustle, yeah? What skills are you learning? What can you bring it back into them? And the last 2 questions to me are really, really key, particularly the fifth one. What do you want and what do you need from me as your leader? So the first time I was asked that was a real wow moment, where I was like, okay, you care. That's awesome. Because what I'd really love is is a little bit more space in those one-on-ones, because I find you just dropping down a whole lot of tasks, and I just need some time to talk about a few things that I'm going through. So really, really powerful, but again, it's actions that are important. And then the other part is this notion of team, or creating team norms. So those are those expectations in your little micro team, right? Not the big agency team, but within your team. How do you want to work? When do you want to work? What does that look like? What's important to each and every member of the team? And I've put some ideas up there that I like, that I've created for my teams in the past, but it needs to be created collaboratively together, because it's got to be meaningful, and people have to deliver them, right? So create that in a little brainstorming session. And don't let them grow dust in your drawer either. Like, bring them up and have conversations about them. Hey, I noticed that was a great example of that team norm where we agreed to always give each other feedback. Good job. Okay, so we're on to table talk number 1. And there's a surprise element of these table talks as well. One lucky table, very, very lucky table, gets to share back their findings. And that table is table number 10. So I want a big woohoo from table 10. The excitement is overwhelming. Okay, so in your tables, I want you to have a think about the social contract that you have with the company already or not, and what elements you find binding, but more specifically, what could make it stronger for you? Awesome, thank you. Woo! Great, so hopefully take that away and start to build more sort of connectivity and making sure that it's personalised to the individual. So the next thing we're going to go through is this idea of continuing to grow through this tectonic change that you're about to face. So, you know, we know that AI is a huge focus, and as I said before, you know, there's a massive investment going into AI and technology from all of your organisations. And as we watch these sort of, you know, apps bubble up, we've got to make sure that we're on top of it. And some of the language that I hear is, well, actually, that's kind of happening in digital. It hasn't happened over in my area yet. True, but it's coming, right? And that's what we've got to have our eyes on, and making sure that we know what's coming and we're staying on top of it. And how we do that is this idea of curiosity. Now, curiosity is nothing new to you guys, right? It's probably one of your behaviours that you're from an agency perspective, but it's actually doing the doing, because curiosity really is your survival mechanism for whatever comes ahead. And particularly when we think of this new tech and AI area that we're moving into, it's actually about sort of uncovering things and interests so that you can stay on top of that. We know that Gen Z have a really deep level of innate curiosity, that they go wide when they're researching, and let's be honest, a lot of them from a tech perspective are starting in our industry already armed with a bunch of certifications and that we don't have. So they're bringing skills into this area that we can learn from as well. So how do we build this curiosity muscle? So again, just some really simple steps to remind you of how to do this and to actually carve out time to do it. So, you know, the first one is stop making excuses. We just heard from the very generous table 10 that you're busy, right? So same thing, this time I want you to lift your knife to be a little bit different. If I asked you, how was your week last week, would you have raised your knife if you would say really busy? Yeah, there's a few lucky ones that aren't, so high five to you guys. So typically, you know, the industry is busy. It's super busy. It's crazy. There's just so much going on. There's pitches, you've got your own clients going on. There's also the churn that sometimes you haven't got 30% of bums sitting on seats that you've got to cover as well, right? So it's actually stop making excuses and carve the time out to really flex your curiosity muscle. And what they say is, you know, we can learn off Gen Zs, right? Because Gen Zs learn in those bite-sized moments. Their focus is probably not as strong because they have access to so much information and data through their digital world. So create space in bite-sized chunks. So carve out 20 to 30 minutes of focus time, white space, where you're actually you're doing that specifically to build your curiosity muscle. And then choose the what. So choosing the what is really interesting, right? So, you know, ask yourself what would you love to learn more about? What do you need to learn more about? And then dig in. Ask people around you. What are you doing for your curiosity? And then, really importantly, is, you know, most of you are leading teams, so it's incumbent on you to role model this curiosity. And actually start to create some interesting space for your team members to start to talk about the so what, and to bring it back into your little micro culture and group. Again, how I would recommend you do that is actually carve out 10 minutes in the WIP each week to have a little curiosity exchange and make everybody bring in that one thing. And if there's something super interesting, obviously share back, right? Share back. Oh my goodness, did you see the Pivot podcast on the 23rd of February? Unreal, it's talking about the future of work. Let's bring that in and talk about it and discuss it and talk about the so what and what does that mean to us? What do you think, yeah? So when we think of this sort of so what and when we're thinking of growing ourselves and our team, think beyond just the typical education piece. I think some really interesting learnings that we can get from Gen Z is they don't see learning in the typical way. Absolutely, they go and get their certifications, but actually they love to do things like this, but they don't see this as a sort of conference. They see this as a socialising opportunity. And when they talk socialising, it's to talk and have conversations to learn off somebody that knows a bit more than them. So, think beyond that education and go into an exposure thinking, but also an experience thinking as well. So what can you learn from experiencing or other people's experiences? The lists there aren't by any way, overwhelming, but there's some really, really good ones. I've mentioned the Pivot podcast, which is unreal, that talks specifically about business and tech, and I highly recommend that you spend literally 20 minutes a week listening to that. So we're not going to do a table talk on this, but this is incumbent on you to do some homework. So have a think about what are you already doing to build your curiosity muscle? Are you actually carving that time out? And what are you going to commit to? What's one thing that you'll commit to from right now to start to really flex that muscle and to lean into that curiosity? Yep. So that's your little homework. So we're going to go straight into the third question, which is this hot topic, top of mind, right, for all HR and leaders, is how do we create a culture of flexibility but still maintain accountability? It's interesting, pre-COVID we used to get our tasks done in the office and, the fun things used to happen outside of the office. Dinners with our team, maybe a sneaky Friday media owner lunch, sneaky or not sneaky. But since COVID, the role of the office has actually flipped because we know we can get the job done outside of the office. So we've got to reframe our thinking and our mindset around what the office means. Yeah. So when we think of flexibility, it's just really important to have trust. So have trust in the process, in flexibility. We know it can work. And I'm looking at you guys as, I think you were the world's most locked down city. Is that right? You guys are the ones that know it can work. You can work from home, right? So you have trust in the process, but we also need to have trust in our people. And that's the kind of thing I'm hearing and seeing that people are getting a little bit more anxious about. When we can't see them, we think that they're not necessarily working. So when we think of this kind of the flexibility, Gen Zs are telling us that they actually want choice. So they don't want you to say they'll must come into the office from 9 till 5 and then leave. What they want to do is that, because they're really informed, right, around their values, but also how they work. So, the early birds like to get up and do work from home and then come into the office at lunchtime. I did a great interview with a guy from Atlassian, a Gen Z, who, he was like, I had a new manager come and I actually said to her, this is how I work, not negotiable. It's pretty cool, right? Now, I know a lot of your companies have policies and rules around how many days to come into the office, but what this is about is how do you work within those rules to make those connections meaningful. And if Monday is one of those days, then do they really need to turn up at 9 a.m. if you know that they're going to get some really deep thinking done at home in the morning? So when we think of this kind of accountability, I've put together a really easy framework to drive that accountability and to ease that kind of anxiety when perhaps people are working from home. Because balancing that flexibility and the freedom to work on their own terms is a bit of a delicate harmony. So really simply is this kind of notion of setting up clear expectations. So, if we were to assume, which I'm sure is coming at some stage pretty soon, if you're in charge of rolling out an AI app on audience enablement to the whole agency, if I was to brief you on that, then I would be giving you really specific instructions here at this point. So what needs to be done? You need to roll out the AI enablement app by the 31st of January this year. Success to me looks like everybody in the agency using that app for all of their client audience analysis from that date. And how we'll measure that is we're going to roll the numbers. We're going to pull the data points. Why is this important? Because when we get this up and running, there's just going to be massive efficiencies from a time perspective, right? No longer do you have to go in and cross-tab absolutely everything and then manually look at the data. Going to remove that human bias as well. And more importantly, the data is going to be a lot more accurate because it's been, centralised and through the AI. Here's the key, right? So when you've nominated somebody, they become what we call the OPUR. So the one person that is ultimately responsible. So that's language I want you to start using in your teams from today. So when you've briefed Johnny to roll this out, then at this stage you go, are you okay to take that job on as the OPUR? Absolutely. And then the rest of the team knows that they are the OPUR, and that's the language. Because interestingly, the number one way to drive accountability is through peer-to-peer team. But if you don't know who the OPUR is, who you're holding accountable, yeah? And then it moves over to the support. And in this kind of modern world that we're working in, support is actually flipping it back. This is a really big job. I'm giving you a really tight deadline. Tell me, I know that you're going to need to look at security, you're going to need to look at testing, you're going to need to look at the different client needs. Tell me what you need to roll this out by that date, and tell me what you need from me to help that happen. Yeah, you might need a bit of time to go and think about that. Let's set up a meeting, next week to confirm that rollout. Does that work? Yeah? And then this coaching for growth idea. So as they go through the experience, do you all know the difference between coaching and mentoring? Yeah, so mentoring is where you tell, coaching is where you ask. So coaching for growth is pulling out those big open-ended questions that start with who, what, why, when, where. So really simply ask those open-ended questions so that they grow from it. Let's talk about that champion network that you created. It feels like it fell down. What happened? What did you learn from that? What would you do differently next time to make sure that there was 100% commitment into that? Because this person that is rolling that out is going to have their own framework going for each of the different money micro tasks that need to be done. Does that make sense? So once we get this kind of concept of trusting flexibility, trusting our people, and we're holding them accountable, we need to start thinking about what those moments in the office look like and how do we make them memorable and meaningful. So Atlassian, who arguably is probably one of the most modern workplaces in existence, did a really interesting study that I'm going to share with you.
When you get people together, we see our team connectivity boost by 30%. So we ask our staff, how connected do you feel to your team? How connected do you feel to the company? And then we get people together, we call intentional togetherness. And then we ask them, how connected do you feel for us? And it was just part of our normal one-off cadence, and we cross-reference that with in-office participation. And so the people we intentionally get together get a 30% spike in connectedness to company and connectedness to team. Now the interesting thing is, if you look at it from an atrophy perspective, right, like how long does it take to return to baseline? It's 4 to 5 months. And so if you actually say, okay, well, if you deal with people like 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year, not that frequently, you can maintain a very high connectedness ratio. And without it, people that do it every single day, you don't actually see that. So it's not like, oh, these are all the others are here, everyone else is for water. No, actually, like being in the office doesn't build intentional togetherness. We sort of work out exactly how to maximize that over time, but like, of course, if we learned it earlier, we would have been much more optimized than we are today.
So super interesting, right? Intentional connectedness. I love that idea. So, and super interesting findings from the Atlassian study that just being in the office doesn't create that feeling of connectedness or intentional connectedness. So when we think of Atlassian, they do large kind of events, I think sort of every quarter, 3 or 4 days, but they also have other things. Obviously they have hot food. You probably do that as well. And interestingly, when I talk to Gen Zs, that's important to them because they like to be fed somewhere else, right? Anyway, thinking about your own organisation, again, what are those intentional connectedness moments that you can create for your team that sort of go over and above what the agencies already, your HR and your leadership team are already creating? How do you make them meaningful when you come into the office? So again, Atlassian do some, they do almost performance things every month apparently, where they bring in a craft person or somebody like that, yeah? So, table talk question number 2, what would intentional togetherness look like for your team and why? Lucky table number, if I can see that, 16, where are they? Not loud enough. 1, 2, 3. Woo! Okay. All right, so you've got probably 5 minutes. Yep. Over to you. Okay. Table 16. 1 minute. Good. Okay, let's hear it from, sorry, what's your name?
Brad.
Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad and Jeff, representing ACT. And for us, intentional togetherness is all about coming with a purpose. So whether that be coming into work or for socializing, it's important to know why we're coming in and contextualize that. So a couple of examples that our table come up with was coming into work together on a week. So to break it down and obviously my suggestion, sometimes just complain about it together. Because if you get a brief, no, seriously, it's like last week. I got a brief and I got it home and I was like, whoa, like it didn't make sense. And then I came in the next day and I'll be honest, I was really nice and complain about it. But I was able to relate to the team about it and we all kind of got to come in together and then, good calls helped me, work through it and be like, okay, this is how this work and as a team, change my attitude towards me and I helped them accordingly. Secondly, and we're in media, so we all know this, it's important to come in to socialize. Daria brought up that a lot of young people actually, some of the old school mentality about media is come in, have a drink, and go late night. A lot of people coming into media from Gen Z don't necessarily like to drink, or a lot of people have social anxiety. It's very normal these days. So it's about coming together intentionally that okay, what is best for our team? Should we do something that's more activity focused? Maybe our team does like to drink, that's fine, and it's all in measures. But as long as we know, and as long as we're not ticking the box, like coming in just for the sake of coming in, we're actually, as you say, being intentional about it, then we all get something box.
Love that. Thank you. So some really, really, really awesome ideas there that you can walk away with as well. So look, we've gone through the 3 key topics. So 3 things to remember as you move into this modern world. First of all, remember the social contract. So make sure that you keep that real engagement and connection with your people. Role model curiosity, super important. Find those moments with your team to share back and create those kind of curiosity exchanges, create the space for it, and build those intentional moments for your team to make sure that coming into the office actually has meaning and people don't feel like they walk in and don't know anybody there, right? So thank you. Enjoy and good luck with the modern work.